Morning Year 6, we are going to finish our book Skysong today. We've only got a couple of chapters left, so we'll read through them and get it done. So we're ready to start our new book after half term, which will be Wonder, which is very exciting. So chapter 34, Esker. If you remember correctly, at the end of the last chapter, they were just about to go to war with the Ice Queen. So, Esker. The battle raged before the palace. Tusk Guards smashed at arrows with their ice spears and shadow shields, while the fur tribe leapt off their sleds and swung javelins. Wolverines and Urkin bears clashed. Balapan dived towards a roaring wolf and nestled inside Woodbird. Esker realised there was something strange about the weapons the outlaws were wielding. The Feather Tribe's arrows were tipped with fist-sized silver balls, which burst open on impact and turned the Tusk Guards into statues of ice. And the wooden javelins that the Fur Tribe launched seemed to unveil as they struck, casting a web of unescapable vines around their enemy. Flint gasped. Blizzard balls! Willow-snatching javelins! And Esker knew what this meant. The tribes, both of them, were using magic to fight the Ice Queen. Flint landed Woodbird on the bridge with a jolt. Down in the driftlands, Tomkin and Jay were wielding weapons as fast as the unrivaling vines, and ice explosions were just a blur in the moonlight. Tomkin looked up at the bridge as Flint pulled Woodbird to a halt. Then Jay tossed him a quiver and he raced towards his younger brother before thrusting his javelin into Flint's hand and the quiver filled with blizzard balls at Esker. Get Blue, he roared, before turning back to the fight. We'll hold off the guards. Leaving Balapan in the throes of battle, Esker and Flint leapt off Woodbird to the bridge. They looked up at the arches leading into the palace hall. We're going to need a run-up for this, Flint muttered. They rushed forward together, launching off the bridge and flinging themselves onto the sill of the ark. Esker pulse quickened at the scene before her. It was as if she had never left. Just meters away lay the empty music box, and beyond that the organ shrouded in icicles and the cluster of silver trees strung with baubles. A familiar fear rippled through her. The Ice Queen stood before the trees, one hand curled around a black orb, her lips parted just before it, and her other hand wrapped around Blue's neck. Beside them, Slither smirked, now and again taunting the fox pup that whimpered in Blue's arms. The Ice Queen lowered the orb and her expression soured. So many interruptions. She slipped the orb into the pocket of her gown, then opened a welcoming arm. Esker, darling, back so soon? She paused, but with no voice, no plan, and no way to set all this right. She sniggered. And with two tribes of children fighting a battle they're sure to lose. Blotting out the Ice Queen's word, Esker slotted the frost horn into her quiver, then pushed a blizzard ball into the tip of an arrow, knocked it on her bow, and pointed it at the Ice Queen. The candles in the chandelier hissed, and the Ice Queen tightened her grasp on Blue's neck. Not so hasty, she laughed. You wouldn't want me to squeeze too tight, would you? Blue began to cry, but the Ice Queen's gaze slid to Flint. And who exactly is your ridiculous little friend? Flint squared his shoulders. Flint, brother of the chief of the Fur Tribe and famous inventor. He readied Tomkin's javelin in front of him. I've come for my little sister and my ma. Esker and Flint leapt from the ice sill, but they hadn't taken more than a few strides across the hall when a dozen Tusk Guards stepped out from the shadows. Esker gritted her teeth. They want a fight, Flint spat. Let's give 'em one. And Esker, filled with fresh rage as the thought of all that the Ice Queen had taken from her, her parents and her memories, her voice, narrowed her eyes, pulled back on her bow. The guards took another step closer. Then Esker fired. Her first blizzard ball hit true, sending one guard crashing to his knees before hardening into ice. And then another guard released a spear, and only in the nick of time did Flint hurl himself forward, slashing the weapon in two with his anything knife, before sending the willow vines coiling around the guard's legs. Esker whipped another arrow out of her bow, her muscles taut with fury. Back and forth, her and her friend gave the Tusk Guards everything they had. For Blue, for Flint's ma, for Esker's own part, and for a whole kingdom on the brink of the Ice Queen's rule. Esker's face flared with sweat, and Flint's cheeks were bleeding from where an ice spear had grazed his skin, but there were only two guards left now, and while Flint and Esker drew them closer, edging back towards the palace wall, Esker ducked beneath one's leg at a very last minute, giving her and Flint the chance they needed to finish the guards off. Panting, Esker looked up at the Ice Queen, but she simply thrusted Blue towards Slither and reached for her crystal staff. Blue tried to wrench free from the shaman's grasp, but he held her and Pebble fast. Don't like it, Blue sobbed. Want to go home? Esker's heart surged with pity for her friend. You call this lump of uselessness a sister, the Ice Queen sneered. What good is she to anybody? Esker started forward for Flint, her jaw clenched. but she wasn't quick enough to stop what happened next. The Ice Queen held up her staff over Blue's body, and though Esker and Flint were now tearing across the hall, they could see the black sharps shooting out of the staff and showering over Blue. The little girl's body stiffened, drained of colour, and then a moment later, she was nothing more than a statue carved from ice, clutching a frozen fox pup. "No," Flint gasped. "No!" The Ice Queen smiled. "Oh, I'm not done yet." And in one deft movement, she smashed her staff into the statue, and the ice shattered upon impact, falling as a shower of glittering crystals. Flint rushed close, but the broken pieces of his sister and the fox pup lay in a heap before him. Esker's blood screamed as she knelt beside Flint, and in that moment of grief, both she and Flint let their guard down. The Ice Queen seized Esker by the shoulders, and Slither grabbed Flint, but the Ice Queen's grip was stronger than her shaman's, 2 pincers of ice digging into Esker's bones, and she couldn't wrestle free like Flint. He staggered backwards, his eyes filled with tears, and Esker's heart swelled with hope at the thought that Flint might be able to fix things. But Flint didn't fight for her, or call out to Tomkin in a battle outside. His eyes met hers, they were utterly defeated. Then he turned, and he ran from the hall. Esker could only blink after his fading footsteps. Slither hastened across the room, and the Ice Queen shook her head. Let him go, to his mute ma in the ice tower, or just to weep at the loss of his silly sister. He's a coward, the Ice Queen muttered, and we've got more important things to deal with. Esker stared at the empty space where Flint had been hardly able to breathe. How could he have deserted her when she needed him most? Shock and hurt coursed through her. She tried to wiggle free, but the Ice Queen dug her nails in harder, her grasp locking the muscles Esker needed to escape. And as she was dragged across the hall, past the silver trees and the organ, she realised where the Ice Queen was taking her: the music box. The prison she'd fought so hard to get away from. She shot a panic glance towards the archers, but Balapan was nowhere to be seen. The Ice Queen breathed on the glass dome, and it vanished from sight. Then she hurled Esker onto the pedestal. "The key, Slither." Slither fumbled in his pocket, then he drew it out and slotted it into the music box. The Ice Queen smiled as she uttered her spell, and Slither turned the key. 3 turns to the left, then half a turn right, with a key cut of black as the deepest night. The music awakens, then limbs unfold as the stolen child comes under my hold. The music began, soft and chiming, and as the Ice Queen released her hold, Esker felt her body subdued to the music box spell once more. The pedestal turned, Esker danced, and her eyes blurred with tears. This wasn't how things were meant to end. Blue was gone, Flint had abandoned her, and Balapan wasn't there to help, and somewhere in this palace her pa remained trapped. The Ice Queen turned away with Slither until all that Esker could see was the dark stamp of the tattooed eye on the back of his skull. Confident she was no longer being watched, she tried to swivel her own eyes around to her quiver. Was the Frosthorn still there? If she could just reach it, perhaps he could help her. There was a low laugh, and Slither spun round. "I have eyes in the back of my head, child, and I know that if you thought we weren't looking, you'd give away your only escape route." He marched over to the music box, tore the Frosthorn from the quiver. "I'll be having that." Esker danced on, the despair swelling inside of her. Then Slither drew back his arm and hurled the horn through one of the arches. Esker didn't hear it crash to the ground. The din of the battle drowned the sound, but she knew that she was completely alone now, without Flint, without the Frosthorn, without Balapan by her side, and without any plan to stop the Ice Queen from using her voice. The Ice Queen breathed on the glass dome over the music box. Then she sat before her organ and she played. The notes sounded louder than ever before. Then her anthem rang out, comprised of just one gloomy voice. A single bauble glowed from the trees, and as the gold drifted from it towards the organ, the battle cries of the fur and feather tribes dimmed. Then the Ice Queen swallowed the last of her stolen voices. Esker's heart sank, and she turned helplessly to her pedestal. She watched the Ice Queen lift the black orb from her pocket. She breathed over the orb, and a little hole in the top melted a show of golden liquid, shimmering inside. Esker could feel the pull of the words she had ever spoken coming from that glow, and she knew that this was her voice. The Ice Queen drained the golden liquid in one terrible gulp, and screwed the empty orb back onto her staff. Esker hardly dared breathe. The fur and the feather tribes would surrender any moment now. The Ice Queen would capture them, swallow their voices to gain her immortality. Then she would wipe out the tribes and use Esker's Skysong to tear the gods down. This was the start of the Ice Queen's rule. But it was not the sound of surrender that Esker heard next. It was an eagle's cry, sharp and high. Balapan swooped through an arch, and as Esker saw her, she realised why she had not heard the Frosthorn clatter onto the ice. The bird had caught it mid-flight, and it clutched it with her talons. "You came," Esker's heart beat. "You came when everyone else had deserted me." Balapan soared towards the music box and used the frost horn to smash the glass away, but neither the Ice Queen or the shaman flinched. Eska's body is under my spell, the Ice Queen cried. No beast can help her now. But the Ice Queen underestimated the eagle and the bond between it and the girl. Theirs was a connection that went beyond the music box spells, ice-staffed and cursed statues. And as Balapan heard the frost horn towards Eska, she felt her body rage against the Ice Queen's enchantment. Outshot her hand into it fell the frost horn, and she closed her fingers around the tusk. Eska leapt down from the pedestal and glared at the Ice Queen. The Ice Queen stood up from her organ. Not possible, she murmured. Balapan dived low and landed on Eska's shoulder, out with the strength of the eagle willing her on. Eska advanced through the hall. The Ice Queen turned to Sliver. Find the boy, just in case he's lurking, and kill him, while I destroy the eagle. The fur and the feather battle cries clamoured again, and Eska, holding the frost horn in front of her like a shield, strode on towards the Ice Queen. She had no voice, but she had an eagle on her shoulder and a heart full of courage, so she kept walking, veering round the organ to the heap of shattered ice where Blue and Pebble had once been. Soon the ice will melt. You've lost your friend forever. But Eska wasn't listening. She raised the frost horn to her lips and thought of Blue and Pebble, of the little girl who had left her home to follow her brother through every possible danger, and the fox pup who had tried his hardest to protect her and the boy. She blew gently this time, and the horns sung a different note again, not the sky song or the battle summoning. Instead, the sound was like clouds rippling, and it stirred the crystals on the floor, whisking them up into the air until they swirled and glimmered. The Ice Queen rushed forward, but a shape was already emerging within the crystals. Only it wasn't a statue anymore. It was in its place stood a girl with ruby cheeks and a bundle of fur wiggling in her arms. The Ice Queen raised her staff and shrieked, "You will not undo my power, Eska!" Black sparks shot out from the staff, but Eska stood in front of Blue, and as she held the frost horn in front of her, the sparks bounced off and fizzled onto the floor. "We Eska's tribe," Blue shouted, no longer scared now that Eska was there to guard her. She stroked Pebble's head. "We her friends, and we never give up." Balapan cried out from Eska's shoulder, and the Ice Queen stalked closer. "Except Flint," she said quietly. "He seemed very happy to run away earlier." Blue shook her head. "Flint fight for Eska, always looking for her, always fighting for her, never leave." The Ice Queen sighed. "Blind as well as stupid, are we?" There was a scuffle of footsteps from the door. "Come, Sliver," the Ice Queen called, but it was not the shaman who emerged from the passageway. It was Flint. The Ice Queen snorted. "If you tied Slither up with Willow Snatch, he'll break his curse in an instant." Flint raised an eyebrow. "Not if the Willow Snatch is drenched in water gathered from a whirlpool. That'll bind him for months on end." He paused. "You don't think I'd enter your palace without a few inventions up my sleeve, did you?" Eyes wide, the Ice Queen raised her staff towards Flint, but at that moment Blue rushed forward and kicked the Queen in both of her legs. Flint's jaw dropped. His sister, alive and full of fight. Black sparks ricocheted off the walls as the Ice Queen stumbled to her knees, but it gave Flint the chance he needed, and he darted towards the trees, grabbing Blue by the hand as he raced past. He thrust a small wooden box at Eska, and from her shoulder, Balapan croaked. "Your memories," Flint panted at Pebble, nuzzling into his leg. "I searched the whole palace until I found this in the throne turret." Eska could scarcely believe that what she was hearing. Flint hadn't abandoned her. He'd gone to find her past. Just bear with me 1 minute. I'm just going to close the door. Sorry about that. I'm just waiting for Mr. Bailey's booming voice. Okay. Eska could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Flint hadn't abandoned her. He'd gone to find her past. "When I saw the Ice Queen's power over Blue," cried Flint, "I realised we needed all the help we could get to beat her. You need to remember who you are, Eska, if you're going to take back your voice." The Ice Queen was on her feet again, her staff aimed at Eska. "You won't be able to open it," she shrieked. "There is no key. I hurled it at the bottom of the ocean the day I captured you." Eska's skin trembled, but Flint held up his anything knife to the keyhole and twisted it this way and that. The Ice Queen strode forward, and through the power of the frost horn was enough to keep back the black sparks of her magic away from the group. A trail of sweat inched down Eska's back as Flint worked his knife in the lock. "Come on, brother, quick!" Flint fumbled with the knife, but the Ice Queen was upon them now, brandishing her staff, and then, just as she brought it down, a shadow fell across her. Eska glanced up to see a large shape had filled one of the palace arches, and she recognised those broad shoulders and wide-set legs. Who do you think it is?
The Ice Queen.
Not her dad? No, it's somebody's in the palace coming to get the Ice Queen, Harry. Who would it be? So it's somebody who's come to help. He's got broad shoulders and wide set legs. White fur, yeah, well done, white fur. White fur had come. The Erkin bear leapt into the room and bounded across the floor towards the Ice Queen. She took a few steps backwards and then remembered herself and aimed her staff at the raging bear. A burst of sparks shot out and the Erkin bear tumbled backwards, but it was up again in seconds. Flint worked harder with his knife until there was a click and the white fur lunged himself at the Ice Queen. Eska pushed the wooden lid open. A swirl of colours twisted towards her, and as they fell about her face, it felt to Eska as if she was looking at a rainbow through mist. And then the mist seemed to fade and the colours became stronger. And finally, Eska saw her past clearly. She was sledging in the Nevercliffs with her ma. Then she was hunting caribou in the driftlands with her pa. Next, she was making a necklace with river quartz with her parents, and she was running hand in hand with them across the hilltops to catch a glimpse of a golden eagle. This was her past, a lifetime out in the wild with two people who loved her more than she could ever have hoped. And suddenly knowing her place, knowing her belongings and all that had come from it, made her grip on the frost horn that much harder. Whitefur wrestled with the Ice Queen, a whirl of claws and nails and fizzling black sparks, and as Eska saw them like that, a more powerful memory surfaced. The last moments with her parents on the driftlands, her ma crying out for her as the wolverines closed in, the Erkin bear trying to set things right, and then a tusk warrior dragging her and her pa to Winterfang. Whitefur hadn't managed to hold the Ice Queen back then, but now he fought with vengeance, and as he thumped an enormous paw across the Queen's chest, pinning her to the ground, he growled at Eska, and Eska could hear the words in that growl because it was a language of those who had wandered the wild. Take what is rightfully yours. Take it back, your voice. Eska stormed towards the Ice Queen while Flint shoved Blue behind him and took on a stream of tusk guards pouring through the arches. Whitefur winced as the Ice Queen struggled beneath him and sent a fresh flurry of sparks into his side. But Eska was running now, and she swung the frost horn at the Ice Queen's staff. The sceptre broke apart upon impact, shattering into fragments on the black ice. The Queen gasped as the ice melted before her eyes, and a gold mist seeped from her lips. It drifted into the hall and settled inside the baubles on the trees, until all of them shone gold once again. The Ice Queen raised a hand to her mouth, but even a brighter mist was slipping through her fingers now, a mist that burned as gold as Balapan's eyes. It whirled into the hall, and Eska stood completely still as she breathed her voice back inside of her. Leaving Flint to fight the last of the tusk guards, Eska sped across the room and leapt up into the open arch. Balapan glided on her shoulder, and they looked at the fight below, a frenzy of blizzard balls, ice spears and willow-snatching javelins. Then Eska held the frost horn high, and desperately hoping she could remember its song, she threw her newfound voice out into the night. At first she sang the low, clear note, but that had sounded like an owl's hoot. Then she launched into a rippling melody, and the song rose like baubles from the depth of the sea. A few of the tusk guards looked up at her, their weapons suddenly limp in their hands, and Eska noticed that their expressions had changed. They were no longer blank and ice-eyed. Their faces were filled with shock and shame, and something like hope. And though Eska didn't dare stop singing, she wondered whether the Ice Queen's hold over her tusk army was gradually weakening. Eska let the melody grow louder, stronger, and as the Skysong burst out, she could feel the power of the mountains and the forests and the glaciers stirring inside her. More tusk guards stopped fighting, the wolverines and the Erkin bears broke apart, and Eska saw Rook, her face brighter and kinder than it had been in the Lost Chambers, push her way through the crowds towards the palace until she was standing alongside Jay and Tomkin. Eska blinked. Even the tusk guards, frozen by blizzard balls and imprisoned by willow snatch, were breaking free from the magic that had bound them and looking up to her with eager faces. All the tribes were listening now, because Ice Queen's curse had worn off. Eska raised her eyes to the stars, to the mighty sky gods glittering from above, and as she sang the last part of the Sky Song, the melody filled with longing and heart and infinite wonder, the sound of her voice whirled up into the night, and the northern lights began to dance. Balapan leapt from her shoulder, wheeling into the colours that spilled into rings and halos across the dark, and Eska knew that no one in Nirkenwall could doubt the presence of magic. The sky gods were up there, and they were dancing for every tribe to see. Eska cleared her throat. "A few weeks ago, I was nothing more than a prisoner here at Winterfang," she cried. "The Ice Queen locked me in a music box and told me I was cursed. She stole my parents, she stole my memories, and then she stole my voice." Eska took a deep breath. "But together with the bravest inventor I know, I escaped and I formed a tribe. And though it wasn't made up of warriors or people who dressed and thought the same way, it was enough, because we were brave and we kept hoping. And though the Ice Queen threw everything she had at us, Tuskards, cursed wolves, mountain ghouls and thunder ghosts, we threw more back. Balapan settled on her shoulder and he ruffled her feathers. We kept going when everything fell apart. We trusted strangers even when we didn't have a plan. And when the Ice Queen tried to silence us, we shouted louder. She raised the frost horn up high. For almost a year, we've lived in a kingdom shrunk to whispers, in a place where the tribes hide from one another in fear. But that is not our Erkenwald. It's time to reclaim our kingdom. There was a deafening roar from below as all three tribes cheered Esker on. She spun around to see the last of the Tuskards sitting on the floor, shaking their heads as if waking from a terrible dream. And she knew that the Ice Queen's curse had been broken once and for all. She watched as Flint raked his anything knife through the baubles that hung from the trees. They crashed to the ground, finally free from the Ice Queen's enchantment, and as Blue stomped them into tiny pieces, the golden glow of the imprisoned voices drifted through the palace towards the ice towers. Whitefur was slumped over the Ice Queen, and his weight held her still. But as Esker approached, clasped the frost corn tight, the Ice Queen's voice trickled out. You and I could work together, Esker, the two great voices with the power to... Esker didn't wait for any more. The Ice Queen was as weak as a ragdoll now that her power had been drained. Esker dragged her by the foot before shoveling her towards the music box. She forced the Ice Queen onto the pedestal. Then with Flint's help, she hurled the glass dome over the top, turned the small black key again and again, faster and faster, until her whole arm ached. Music began, the clash of discordant notes this time, and very slowly the Ice Queen's body began to break apart into tiny shards of ice. Moments later, all that was left was her crown of frozen tears. Esker rushed back to Whitefur and bent down beside him. Thank you, she whispered. You held the Ice Queen back so that I could call the tribes together. The Erkenbear didn't reply, and Esker's hands stilled over his fur. Whitefur? She leant over so that she could see his other side. It was red beyond repair, and only then did Esker realise what had happened. While she had been uniting the tribes, Whitefur had been dying. Flint and Blue gathered close. I thought Erkenbears couldn't die, Esker said in a small voice. I thought Whitefur was beyond the Ice Queen's dark magic. She let her head rest against the bear as tears began to fall, and Flint and Blue did the same. He fought for you out in the Driftlands last year, Flint's voice was croaked, and he fought inside the palace tonight. He would have fought again, Esker, because his heart was good and true and brave. Erkenbears, Esker said through tears. I remember my past stories about them now. Wanderers call them the ever-wandering ones. They believe that even after they die, their souls speak to us from fresh snowfalls. And though the thought of being able to speak to Whitefur again sent a glimmer of hope through Esker, it didn't ease the pain, and she cried on for the life of her old friend. They lay with their arms around the Erkenbear for a while longer. Then the sound of pummeling footsteps filled the palace. The prisoners in the ice towers, they'd been freed, Flint breathed, forcing himself to his feet. Ma! He rushed from the hall, hand in hand with Blue, and Esker would have followed her had her ears not snagged on another sound. Esker? Esker's legs felt suddenly weak beneath her, and her breath scrubbed through her throat, because she recognised that voice. Pa, she whispered, and then louder she rushed towards the archers where the call had come from. Pa! Grabbing an abandoned knife from the ground, Esker leapt out onto the palace wall. She dug the knife into the ice there, and used it to clamber up on top of the highest dome, and there she stood up tall. Pa! Tomkin and Blade had scaled the ice towers and hacked open the door that had blocked the prisoners in, and now men, women, uncles, aunts and grandparents were pouring across the bridges that connected the towers to the palace and rushing into the arms of their children. Esker's eyes flitted between the crowds, then they fixed on a tall man with broad shoulders who wore the furs of a silver wolf. He was faster than the others over the bridge, but he didn't rush into the palace. He grabbed a spear from the ground, snapped it in two, then he dug the spikes into an ice dome and began to climb towards his daughter. Esker felt her heart shake. Pa! Wolftooth hurled himself up onto the top of the dome, and he didn't stop to gather his breath. He rushed towards Esker and scooped her up into his arms. My little girl, he sobbed, my precious little girl. And as Balapan called out from the violet sky above, Esker held on to her pa. So we're on to the very, very last bit now. This is an epilogue, so this tells us what happened after the battle, okay? And so it was that the Ice Queen's rule crumbled. The sun rose just hours after the battle ended, and because this was the midnight sun, the one that would shine all through spring and summer without ever setting, the enchanted iceberg melted as quickly as it had been conjured. Spears fell, walls slumped, and the ice oozed into the sea. Nothing remained afterwards, not even the music box or the silver trees. The tribes boarded their sleds, and, at the invitation of the Feather Chief and the Chiefesses, raced across the ice towards the Never Cliffs. There was time for hiding and a time for fighting, but this, everyone knew, was a time for a feast. Long into the night and day, the tribes talked, ate and drank goblets of cloudberry juice inside the lost chambers. And as so often happens after adventures end, the stories began. Tales of blizzard balls and wolverines, of willow snatch and cursed musk oxen, of musk oskin. But no story was as bold and as magical as the one Esker, Flint and Blue had to tell. They were interruptions, of course, for stories in their first tellings are rarely neat or simple. But despite Blue's dramatic gurgling sounds that recount in the episode with the Thunder Ghost, despite Pebbles yapping at the ice spider incident, and despite Tomkin apologies to Flint for ever doubting his inventions or the power of Urkemore's magic, the trio did eventually get to the end of their tale. And all the while the golden eagle perched on Esker's shoulder. The girl wondered whether the bird would leave her now that their quest was over. But then a new story was told by Wolftooth, one from a father to his daughter, about a woman who had befriended an orca while caught out at sea. The whale was never tamed, for that would be like trying to tame the waves. But the animal shared a bond with the woman right through to the end, and Esker began to understand that even though this adventure might be over, something that would not and could not be broken had been left in its wake: friendship. Between a wanderer and a golden eagle, but also between them and a fox pup, an inventor boy, a little girl with a very large heart. There was singing and dancing in the hours that followed. The Feather Tribe sang of ancient giants, much to the Grey Man's delight, and he made a point of not showing it by complaining extra loudly about his crooked back that he had acquired while crawling through the entrance to the lost chambers, because giants like nothing better than a good dose of sympathy. The Fur Tribe danced and enchanted and re-encanted the legacy of the hunt, which involved a lot of stomping and quite a few drums, and the Tusks retold their ancestors' stories through soapstone carvings. As midnight drew near, everyone gathered outside of the lost chambers. The sky was still a dazzling blue, but despite the sunlight, 6 stars glittered like faraway diamonds. The sky god's magic was there for all to see, and even though the tail of the little bear had lost one of its lights, the constellation seemed to burn brighter than it had before. And to Esker, Flint and Blue, the stars felt like a reminder of the dear friend that they had buried in the Nevercliffs a few hours before, and of what the smallest and most unlikely of tribes could do with a pocket full of courage. Eventually the tribes dispersed, tired from the night of celebration and full of promise to awaken and a harmonious Erkenwald. A plan was formed by Wolftooth and Wildpaw for the following weeks, because when grown-ups get involved, that tends to happen. But this was a plan built of wanderers, rules, and Fur Tribe inventions. The hideaway between the giant's beard was to be Wolftooth and Esker's home for a while, until the seasons changed and they felt like moving on. First, though, Flint had a detour he wanted to share with Esker, one that involved cloud cushions, weather clocks, and moonlight hammocks. But just as Wildpaw and Wolftooth were readying their sleds, there was a roar that shook the core of the highest mountain. 2 enormous Urken bears bound through the snow and stopped before the gathering. Esker dipped her head at the bears, then she climbed up on one while Flint, Blue and Pebble mounted the other. The children didn't need to tell the bears where they wanted to be taken. The Urken bears already knew. This was a journey home. They charged through the cliffs, and as the golden eagle cried out in the sky above, Esker leant close to the Urken bear. Her words were hushed and almost lost to the sound of the thumping paws, but the wild heard it and carried her voice up and up, past the eagle's wings and beyond the peaks of the Nevercliffs, until it reached the constellation glittering over the kingdom. This is the wild, Esker whispered to the sky gods, and the wild doesn't play by ordinary rules. And that is the end of Skysong. Yes, I'm glad you enjoyed it. That is the end of our story. I hope you've really enjoyed it. You can buy the story on Amazon or eBay if you want to have another go at reading it yourself. It is a fabulous story. If you want to invest in that, or if you want to write me a book review, that would be amazing. Or you could even leave a comment on Dojo and let us know what you actually thought of the story. I know we've definitely enjoyed it in class, haven't we? So I hope you've enjoyed that. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and we will hopefully see you all very soon. And say bye. Bye.